Welcome to the New South Wales Government's Business Connect webcast on business disruption. My name is Steve Waite. I'm the CEO of the Business Centre and also a Business Connect business advisor. The Business Connect program is a dedicated program funded by the New South Wales Government and delivered through a network of independent service providers to help you start or grow your small business. Today's webcast is titled Marketing 101 to Survive and Prosper During Covid-19. So whether you're a business that's been able to remain open, or you've had to close or slow down or change your operation in some way, we'll hopefully give you some insights today that will let you consider some strategies and tools on how to approach marketing within the context of this current crisis or business disruption. So some of the areas we're going to discuss with our expert guest are, what should you actually do about marketing now, and how do you make sure you do the right thing? Perhaps it's time to be loud. Should I review what my competitors are doing? Does this disruption happen in the same way for everyone? How do I really know who my customer is? And everything has changed, but everything has stayed the same. So I'm about to introduce Gerad, and I guess I've sort of summarised these questions that we're going to cover today and talk about as the doing the right thing question, the Harvey Norman one, don't get Amazoned, the Nike question, and the Bunnings one about whether you get a Victor or a mascot mower. So that's the sort of encapsulating what we're trying to do. So all the areas that we're going to highlight today about the importance of foreseeing how you can best communicate your value in an ongoing and authentic way in this period of volatility that has created both a crisis and an opportunity at the same time. So to our guest speaker, Gerad's been doing advertising and business strategy for a dozen or so years. He has a unique take on marketing and advertising, originally being trained and qualified as a mathematician. He likes finding simple solutions to complex problems. Gerad describes himself as an inventive but honest thinker, helping brands become famous for being interesting. Today, Gerad is going to help small business owners take us on an immersive journey, how small businesses can market in the era of business disruption caused on this occasion by Covid-19, but given what we know about a world that we live in now, disruption is almost a thing that is a constant, and so being able to adapt to disruption is just an important key asset of a business to be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
First question we always ask though is, why my goodness, how has this been for you in your life, in your business, in your work? What's it been like?
Yeah, I think for me, like everyone, it's been, in my time on this planet, we've never had to deal with anything of this sort of scale at one point that's affected. I don't think I can't think of anything that has affected everyone since the moon landing.
Okay.
That everyone's sort of been watching the same bit of news. Now, obviously, there have been things in between, but to this scale, But I think, for us, and I think probably just to sort of preface this chat as well, I think it's useful, to think about this point of time that we are, this phase. I think if we'd had this conversation 2-3 months ago, it would have been a very different outcome.
Yes.
We would have been talking about very different things. And, so we're talking here about, I'm kind of, and sort of our business, Enigma, and how we're working with our clients, we're very much forward-focused and looking optimistically about how we all start coming out of this, rather than how we deal with the throes
of it when it was happening.
So obviously for our business, we're reliant heavily on consumer and business confidence. If those two things drop, then people are less willing to put their name out in the market. And we'll talk about that later, whether or not that's the right thing to do. But so it was difficult for us. We had we were on reduced time, but we're as a business doing, as I said, sort of coming out of it now and looking positive. Lisa, our boss, is always very optimistic about these things. When it sort of first started getting very serious, she was like, "Look, this isn't the first downturn I've been through, and we always come through, and we're going to come through this." And that was the attitude she took in, and it was positive.
One of the slides that we're about to put up soon talks about the central, I guess, concept of that we are all in this together, and no more can that be true than now that a supplier is connected to a customer, to a business, and so on. So we are all in this together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, but I mean, also for us, we've found some positives, like a lot of businesses that we've worked with, in terms of, it's sort of speeded up our adoption of some digital technologies and simple things like video conferencing. We've got an office in Sydney as well. And so we should have probably before this been a lot better and,
Yes.
and using that. We spend a lot of time on the freeway,
Yep.
which isn't great for our carbon footprint apart from anything else.
Yeah.
And so I think we'll sort of be a little bit more reliant and a bit more comfortable with those sorts of technologies. So,
Okay.
but yeah, I think we kind of as a business are feeling a bit more optimistic at this point in time. If we were sitting in Victoria right now, I think it'd be a different story.
You make some good insights into that in here as using almost Victoria as a benchmark, as a place to connect. But let's get into it. And so the first question, I guess, that we're going to address, and there's a couple of charts to put in here, and then the second part of this question, we've got a video that you've put together for us that we'd like to show as well. But there's a couple of charts here from Deloitte in regards to a millennial versus Gen Z survey, and then another chart based on historical statistical data around recessions and how businesses respond in regard to spending on advertising and on marketing. But first of all, let's get to this question. And thanks so much for your insights that we've had before this and some of the reading you gave me for us to bring you here today. So, what should small businesses actually do about marketing now, and how do you make sure that you do the right thing? So you just call that slide in when we need it, but what are your thoughts there?
I think it's a really reasonable question and something that a lot of large and small businesses have grappled with. And I think there is a fear that while everyone's dealing with this and the very dire consequences, is it crass to be out in the market and to start talking about things, and has the right thing has what the right thing is changed and things like that? My point of view is twofold, but firstly, I think it's important to sort of go back and say, what's the right thing to do now? And I think the question is, has the right thing changed? And I think now is probably a good time to look at.
Okay, let's put
Deloitte
that slide up from Deloitte, which talks to that sentiment piece. So comparing different.
So Deloitte do an annual global survey of millennials and Gen Z, and I don't want to get into millennials and Gen Z and whether that means anything, but it's a useful sort of benchmark. And I think they ask the question, there's a series of questions here, and basically, the general thrust of it is, has COVID-19 changed your attitude towards this? Whether you're more, more community-minded, whether all these sorts of questions. Now, it's easy to look at that and go, oh, well, COVID's made everyone, all these very positive changes in people's attitudes towards, things like community and how important that is.
Yeah.
But the statements in there's nothing in there, I think, that anyone would have argued against before. I don't think anyone would, I sort of joked just before this, but you could ask that question about, has your football team winning the grand final made you more community-minded? And people would say, yes, it has, and all these sorts of things. So I don't think, in answering that question, what's the right thing to do now, I don't think the right thing to do has changed. I think maybe it's a little bit more amplified. And I think the only thing is that maybe businesses in the past could get away with doing the wrong thing a bit more, but I just don't think you can get away with that. And so my kind of point is all of those things in that Deloitte chart, if you're not doing those now, or if you weren't doing those, then I can't, I can't really help you. And I think it's, it's just, it's not a matter of I need to start doing the right thing now. It's you should have always been doing it.
Essentially, that chart affirms to us that there are certain fundamental values and behaviours that you don't need to, through marketing or advertising, to reinforce, because if you weren't doing the right thing before, you certainly probably wouldn't be doing the right thing now. So you don't need to go out of your way especially to emphasise that in marketing and advertising.
Yeah, absolutely not. No, and I think, especially maybe if we'd have had this conversation, as I said, 4 months ago, I might have had a different opinion, but coming out of it as we are, and I think people starting to think more about returning to normal.
So you gave me some research to look at, some economic research that took a deep dive into the effectiveness of advertising or not advertising in comparison to the economic cycle, etc. So will we put that chart up, and then you can talk to that? Yeah.
So I think there's two parts to that question. Is advertising now the right thing to do from a moral and ethical point of view? And I think it is. But also from an economic point of view, I think, whenever there's a recession or a global downturn, there is a surface level common sense approach that says, well, if there's less money in the market, if there's less consumer confidence, if there's less disposable income, then advertising now is a waste of money because I'm advertising to people who can't buy. And on one level that makes sense. And also from an economic perspective for the business, as revenues get, clamped down and margins erode during those periods for the business itself, there's less money to spend on marketing. And sometimes at the best of times, marketing can be seen by a lot of businesses as a luxury. And so the question is, well, we're in a recession now, or if we're in an economic downturn now, let's just turn off the marketing because there's no point, because there's no one to buy.
Because that's the orthodox view, isn't it, that seems to pervade.
And
however,
so,
the research tells us
there is
something else. Yeah.
Sorry, I like to drink a lot of water.
Yeah.
The chart up at the moment, and yes, it's from the 70s, and it's easy to say, well, the 70s are very different. But the research paper that this is drawn from took a fairly long-term view across. There's 4 separate recessions that it looks at in the 20s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And there's been subsequent work looking at the GFC as well. Yeah. And all it does is this chart here compares 4 scenarios of firms that continued to advertise, during both years of the recession, stopped advertising or reduced their advertising spend during both years, and then combinations of the two. Yes. And what you can sort of see here is I can't see the colours here, but as these indexes grow, the lowest line are those firms that cut their spend in both. So you can see that there's still some growth there, but when you look at that first line there, that first column of those that didn't cut their spend, that continued to spend and potentially even increase their spend during both years of recession, went against the orthodox view, their sales indexes just sort of grew and outstripped the market. And there's 2 reasons that drive that. A lot of that comes from market share growth. As mercantile as this sounds, recessions and downturns are fantastic times to grow market share dramatically because of that orthodox view. I'm going to reduce my spend. And so if you increase your spend during those times, if you're lucky enough to be able to afford to, or if you can find a way to, and you should find a way to, I mean, as self-serving as that sounds for me as an admin, but what happens there is, as everyone else's spend comes down and yours goes up, your share of voice grows dramatically. And
there is a key term we need to keep in mind, this share of voice.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that and the link between share of voice and share of market as well. But yeah, so even without understanding, without getting too bogged down in the mechanisms of how, there is very clear data. And we've shown this chart from 74, 75, but it's the same
research
trend.
You had me read definitely in a number of papers overall demonstrates that sometimes by a factor of 6, 2 years, 3 years post the recession or the economic downturn, if you invest in advertising, and we're going to get to sort of one of the other outcomes about loudness, if you invest, then you are far likely to be in a better position. And this is empirical research, not a messaging exercise from a marketing association. It's empirical research.
It's and I think because during recessions there is pent-up demand for these services, and that money has to go somewhere, and that pent-up demand afterwards, and where it's going to go is in the companies that people can remember still existing. And you create those memories during the downturn.
So that brings me to our next question, which is pretty good timing, and we can come back to some other areas. We've got some questions coming through as well, which we will get to, but I just want to get to connecting this first question to the second one, which is about the principle of being loud. And in a moment, we're going to show a video. Perhaps we'll do that very soon. And then we've got some other charts which explore a little bit the share of marketing, share of voice dynamic. But the question is, and it's one I was really intrigued when you and I spoke about this before, this is maybe perhaps the time to be loud, and you use as an example of that, as an example, I guess, a case study of Harvey Norman. How loud is that?
They're loud in a very specific way. They're loud in a sledgehammering sort of way. And Harvey Norman can afford to run a very bland, very annoying ad in every single ad break in the footy and get their message out that way. That that has proven to be an okay strategy for Harvey Norman. I don't think it's the best one they could have employed, but it's working for them and will continue to work purely by spending a huge amount of money on media.
Yeah.
The small businesses that you're working with and we're talking about today absolutely can't afford that. And so what they have to do, it's how do they, if you've got a tenth of the media spend, then what you do with that tenth has to be 10 times what I call louder. And loud it's not just a volume thing.
So you talk here about, louder because the world is even noisier.
Yeah.
Companies compete with other companies for categories. So, as you say, an accountant shouldn't just advertise with other accountants in mind, because you talk here about there's other categories of advertising like the footy, the Bachelor, the kids, Instagram. So you've got to be clear. Absolutely.
And that's a distinction I always like to make is, businesses get bogged down when they think about their competition for their advertising and they go, oh, what's the market doing? So what are the other accountants doing? What are the other butchers doing? And that's great from a business perspective. Other businesses in your category are your competition, but from an advertising or marketing perspective, your competition is the things that people are actually interested in, and the things that you said, with Bachelor or whatever it might be. And that's what you're competing with, and you've got to be able to cut through that. So and it's a difficult thing, but I think it's a good ambition to remember that when you're trying to be heard in the market, you need to be as interesting and as engaging as whatever the hell happened on The Bachelor last night. Okay, so do you want to set this video up for us and we'll get the guys? I think this is a good video, yeah. So just give us a setup and then we'll go with the video. So give us a sense. So I think it's very easy in when especially even in an agency sense, you've got a really big screen and you're designing let's just talk about a billboard because it's an easy example to think about. And you're designing that and it's a quiet environment, and on your big screen that you're designing on, this billboard looks massive and it's the only thing you're paying attention to. You've got your headphones on, so even blocking out background noise to look at this billboard and analyze it and pull it apart. What we've got here is a video that places that actual work in the context of real life. And what we've done is we've pulled out some, just used some dash cam footage, and just to see how advertising appears in the real world for normal people who aren't focused intently on it. And so we'll roll the video and then have a bit of a chat about it after that, I think. Okay, if we can just roll that video, guys, and then we'll come back and Gerad will give us a sense of the messaging and some of the principles about noise and loudness and cutting through. Yep. Okay, play that video, thanks.
Collingwood cheer squad. I can't understand ya, and that doesn't matter. I've got no idea why I keep getting better. They call me a knob and they call me a dunce. But by the way, what we're having for lunch. I'm too young to die. I'm too young
Okay, give
so
us
like,
the...
I mean, you talk about loud, right? What's interesting, and I did this as an exercise within our agency, so I played that to everyone. And so we're all advertising people, and we're trained to look for we walk around all day looking at billboards, more than normal people do. But you show this to normal people, and then a really interesting question at the end is how many ads were in that video, right? Like paid advertising spots. And this is not even including signage on the side of buildings or on cars or, hoarding or things like that, just pure billboards, posters, things like that in that video. And you ask people and you look at it and I don't know, a couple, there's at least 30.
Wow.
And then you say, name some of the brands. And no one can. Because none of those posters were designed to be loud or, dare I say, obnoxious, I'm just going to make this very clear. This is not in any way or shape or form an endorsement. No, but when I put that video together, it was during the election. Yeah. And it's really interesting then to put up, one of the Clive Palmer billboards. They were horrible. They were the khaki-est yellow. That was him. They were big. Yeah. You couldn't miss them. Now, I'm not saying that. Obviously, Clive Palmer, absolutely not. But you couldn't miss them. Yeah. And I think that's a really important lesson for, the most important thing you can do in marketing is be noticed. So, and that seems pretty clear. But there is really clear sort of empirical evidence on that as well. So there's a group in the UK called the IPA. It's a different IPA to ours. They're the Institute of Practicing Advertisers. Yeah. And they have access to databases of thousands and thousands of campaigns over decades. And two guys, Peter Field and Les Binet, did an analysis across looking at all of those campaigns and the effectiveness of them. And when we say effectiveness, we mean things that are driving proper business metrics, sales, profit growth, margin growth. So it's not soft sort of metrics like awareness or Facebook impressions or anything like this. It's hard business metrics. And what they found, above and beyond, the most effective strategy was campaigns that created fame. And what we mean by fame is, I think the best, I don't like to use, when talking about small businesses, I don't like to use your sort of classic examples of a Coke ad or something like that, because they're big businesses.
Gorilla.
But I think there's other places that we can learn from, and it's things like, if you think about fame, right, and talking about being loud, if I said, name a piano player, you're far more likely to say Elton John or Liberace than some amazingly, far more technically proficient, classically trained pianist who I can't even think of. Because of the stupid glasses and the big hair and the outfits and things like that. Because they knew a part of driving their business, because musicians are businesses, driving their business forward is being known, being remembered, being outrageous and those sorts of things. So I think, that is for me, whether it's COVID or not. And I think especially in COVID, because the world is so much more noisier now, there is so much more to compete for attention. And going back to that point, you're not competing with other businesses, you're competing for attention.
Shall we put that chart up so you can talk then to some of those principles, that SOV, SOM?
So I think if this is one of the charts from that work from Field and Binet. And so what you can see, it's a simple sort of line chart, but what we have on sort of your vertical axis is your share of voice. So if you look at all of the media spend in your category, what percentage of that is yours? And then on the bottom axis, the x-axis, you've got your share of market. So of all the toothbrushes sold, how many of them are yours? And there's a very, very clear relationship that they have seen, again, looking across thousands of case studies, that there is a very, very clear relationship between your share of voice and your share of market. And the basic rule of thumb is, if you want to grow your business, and who doesn't, your share of voice, how visible you are in the market compared to the competitors, has to be above your share of market. So if you've got 10% share of market, if your share of voice is 5%, chances are your business is going to shrink. But if your share of voice is 15%, then you're going to grow.
So this is the more sophisticated understanding and knowledge that you're sharing with us about being loud. Not being loud by doing the wrong thing or being crass, but cutting through.
Yeah, of course. So I think if you come back to that Harvey Norman example, because it's really good, they grow their business by spending an extraordinary amount of money of their share of voice above their share of market, and they can afford to do that.
Yeah.
Most of us can't.
No.
And so within that research, there's some really clear indications of what drives. So once you understand this relationship between share of voice and share of market, they then introduce this term which they call excess share of voice. So if your share of market is 10%, your share of voice is 15%, the difference there is 5, your excess share of voice is 5. But not all excess share of voices are created equal.
Right.
So they then looked at what are the driving factors that drive what they call efficiency in that excess share of voice. So how do you make that share of voice work harder? And there's a really clear indication that they looked at, all of their case studies. They said these are the campaigns that weren't creatively awarded. So within advertising, we have it's our version of the Oscars or whatever you want to call it. It's a bit self-serving, but the campaigns that weren't creatively awarded, I've sort of got it here that their share of voice efficiency is less than 0.5%. It's like 0.2%. When you compare that to the campaigns that were highly creatively awarded, so were recognised by the industry as being highly creative, which is what I call, loud, memorable, engaging, interesting, the kind of things that in the olden days you'd stand around a water cooler saying, "Did you see that Yellow Pages ad?"
Yeah.
Or Rhonda and Katut, all these sorts of classics of the genre.
Yeah.
So not creatively awarded, that share of voice efficiency is less than 1%, 0.2. When you look at the highly created awards, it's a factor of 3.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like 11 times highly creative. I think the number is highly creatively awarded campaigns are 11 times more efficient in that.
So when we take that principle, that learning back to small businesses, what does it mean?
Well, I think it's really hard, and the question here, and I can imagine a lot of people sitting at their keyboards going, but I can't afford to spend on TV, and of course you can't.
Yep.
I think where you look at is you have to then re-look at what you do with digital and social media and even your website. Traditionally, we look at those channels because they were sort of sold into the industry, and there is a huge amount of data and the targeting that you can achieve, and you can get to, we're told, you can target 6 buyers who are in the market already looking into your thing.
Yeah.
But what people sort of forget with those channels is they are, if used to engage people, to entertain people, they can be tremendous brand building channels. So I think, what brands are doing that well? I wouldn't really look at how brands are using social media to do that, because they're not generally doing it well. The people who are using social media to create big brands and to create fame and interest and engage a large audience are teenagers who want to become famous on TikTok or who want to become a famous YouTuber.
So what are the elements that are making them successful? You gave me some insights to that. What is it that they're doing? What
they do really well compared to businesses. So a large business might approach creating let's just say a YouTube video.
Yeah.
A large business will spend 6 months doing a whole lot of work, spending a whole heap of money.
Big campaign, real strategic.
Yeah. Pontificating, going backwards to having 16 layers of approval. It has to go up to the board to make sure that we do the right thing. And then what you end up is this idea by consensus that's had 50,000 people approve it, that we all agree this is the right thing. And when 50,000 people, I'm exaggerating, but when 10 people agree on what the right thing is, it's had every single edge knocked off it, and it's not that interesting.
Okay.
In the 6 months that they've decided to shoot this one video and put up on YouTube, the teenager has shot 30 quick videos they've thrown a heap of mud at the wall to see what sticks, and they've just sort of gone with it. Now, that seems like a really dangerous strategy. But what these kids do really, I say kids like I'm an old man, but what people who are trying to build a presence on social media and doing it well do really well is they trial a heap of things, but they don't just shoot a shotgun at it. They're actually really strategic in the way they look at what does and doesn't work for them and how they find their voice over time in that. And what they do really well is immediately once they post something, they're looking at the metrics straight away.
Wow.
And they're making a decision on whether or not this has worked within hours. And you'll often find that they'll post content. If it hasn't taken off within a couple of hours, they'll just pull it down.
Pull it down.
Pull it down. Because what you find is, and you see this even if people are trying to build a Twitter profile, you'll see someone will have one tweet and it's got 50,000 retweets. And you go, wow, that's really funny. And then you look at their Twitter and the next 10 tweets are rubbish, right? But if they deleted those 10 and only kept the really killer ones, you're going to follow them. You know what I mean? So you go, yep, great tweet, look at the rest of them, the rest aren't good, I'm not going to follow them. Great tweet, it's all killer content, delete the bad stuff.
Wow.
And what you do through that is you sort of start to gradually identify what your voice is, and you are, you know, it's about finding a strategy through doing rather than, you know, overthinking it.
Okay.
There's other examples we can talk about.
That's good. Good insight. We might jump into a couple of questions.
Yeah, sure.
We've got a few there to get us through. So let's pick a couple off here. Sandra said, I see a lot of amazing businesses do good work for people, genuine work, but they struggle to share their stories. When I ask them why, it's often due to capacity within their small business. What tips or hacks do you have for them, Gerad?
Yeah, getting that message out.
It's a bit like what you've just been talking about.
It's a fine line between anything that you do and actually create has more impact than anything that you put off because it wasn't perfect.
Wow. Yeah, good insight. Yeah.
So, you know, I think there's often a fear that if this isn't, you know, if we're producing a video to put on Facebook or whatever, you know, if I don't have a good enough camera or if I don't have everything that goes in with that. If I can't do it perfectly, if it's not going to look professional, then it's not worth trying. And I think, you know, I up to a point, you know, I think what's really been interesting, and if you look at sort of, you know, trends in terms of content production and how this sort of looks, one of the things about COVID, we're so used now to seeing people on screens through Zoom with terrible lighting and pixelated things, and a lot of, you know, really big businesses have used that style of footage and have now had to adapt in how they produce content themselves. So I think if, you know, I've been looking at a lot of content that's coming out of sports brands in the US, so NFL teams and things like this, and all they do is they just say to their players, just do a tour of your house on your iPhone and send it in. And people are interesting. There's two things, you know, that people are more tolerant of lower production values, you know, consumers. But I think it also adds a layer, you know, for small businesses, a layer of authenticity. You know, I don't really like the word authenticity, but I think intimacy. You know, it feels sometimes like you're being more genuine and bringing people in
a bit. You're letting people in.
So I think, you know, I mean, it seems like sort of glib advice, but, you know,
let's get to another question.
Yeah.
Okay, so Simone asks, where can I find information based in Australia on changing trends around consumption of media?
So, changing trends on consumption media, it's, you know, as an agency, we have access to a lot of tools that cost quite a bit of money. I think one of there's some good resources now I can never remember the acronyms of the names of things, but we can put some links up.
We'll put it in the footer. Yeah.
So, you know, one really good source, I talked about the IPA in the UK. A similar organisation in Australia is ADMA, which is, they've changed what it stood for, so I can't remember, but ADMA, a good organisation. IAG is another organisation. more in the digital space to understand trends there and consumption behaviours there.
Yeah. Okay.
Just thinking about the question. I know the question's
It's
gone
gone.
there,
All right, another question. Natalie asks, is radio advertising still relevant from your experience, you guys? In what way? Tell us.
I think, you know, there was probably a period, and so Enigma, we're a full service agency, so we have media in-house. So we have a media booking agency as part of us. And they were the ones who probably, you know, across our different portfolios in our business, they were the ones who probably sort of were hit the hardest during COVID, because that media spend was reduced, because, you know, out of home was difficult because people weren't out of home. Literally went out of home. And radio as well was a big thing, because the majority of radio is listened to in the car, right? And if you're not driving to work. Now, you know, certainly in regional areas, you know, outside of Sydney. But I mean, the commute's still huge in Sydney for everyone, you know, the population of Western Sydney. So radio is still, you know, and if you look at, and I can, off the top of my head, I don't have them, but there is some resources I can share around the effectiveness of different media channels. And radio and those traditional channels, radio, TV, print, we went through this phase of, because digital and that TV's dead and no one watches, we all have Netflix and no one watches TV anymore. The numbers on those traditional channels and how much traffic they get is still huge, and they are more effective.
Tell me about, because increasingly I've been a long time consumer of podcasts, and I've noticed increasingly the encroachment of advertising into that space. What's your experience of that? And in fact, podcasts that I listen to that are international, I'm noticing now, I'm getting very localised ad content coming through the feed for me that's specific to
the technicalities of that side of things is outside my area of expertise. How that happens. Are
you getting that type of request, or is that coming towards you now?
Yeah, we're increasingly hearing about two things on podcasts. Is, you know, just placing advertising within them, but also developing them. So brands thinking about what we can do. So, you know, if you're thinking about, you know, if you're an accountant, is there a way of creating a longer form, engaging, you know, piece of content around podcasts that isn't just talking strictly about money, but makes sense for an accountant to be talking about, but is still entertaining. So we're seeing those sorts of requests coming through as well.
All right, let's move along to our next question. This is the question I call the don't get Amazon question. But this question is, should I review what my competitors are doing? Does this disruption happen in the same way for everyone? And you said you're a bit shocked here about some naivety of businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound critical, but, you know, when you work in advertising, you're constantly introduced to working in new categories. You know, so different types of businesses. And often, you know, as part of our process, you know, we'll come in if we're developing a new brand or a advertising campaign or a you know, business strategy, whatever it might be for them. Part of that process is for us to do a competitive review. Now, I always feel a little bit nervous coming back to present this to clients, because I think I've never worked in this category before. If it's something that I've not worked in before, I always think, you know, I'm going to come back after just Googling this stuff for a few days or a week, and I'm going to present, and I feel a little bit nervous, because I'm assuming that the business is going to go, yeah, tell me something I don't know. But what I'm often shocked is that, you know, I'll have a, you know, and this sounds like a brag, but that, you know, someone like me will develop a better understanding of what's happening in the competitor space from not just in advertising, but from a product point of view, from an innovation point of view, and from a service delivery of the competitive space. And I'm often shocked to present a competitive review and the client go, oh, well, we didn't know that, you know. And so I think, you know, in terms of looking at your competitors, I think there's really clear insight in that we don't do enough. And I understand, you know, people working in and running small businesses, it is hectic.
There's a lot on their shoulders,
But, you know, at the best of times, there's a lot on your shoulders. And I think we'll get to that. The idea that you feel as a small business owner the weight of the world on your shoulders, and that everything's up to you and you have to solve everything. But you can relieve a lot of that weight by taking a day, 2 days every quarter to just lift your head up and look at what the competition's doing, because you may find through that someone has already solved. You will find that someone has probably already solved, because across a category, everyone has the same problems and everyone's trying to solve them. And so take some time to see if someone already has.
Yeah.
And, you know, and not just look in the local market, you know, look.
Well, I love this insight that we spoke to here, where you speak to, particularly relevant to New South Wales businesses who are the consumers of this, that the stage 2 situation, or phase 4, whatever it is in Victoria, is a place to see innovation in action and adaptation.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think one of the really positives that's happened in the small business world from COVID is people have very rapidly realised that the success of every small business depends on the success of every other small business in that market. So we talked about the other day as an example, you know, when restaurants were closed. And a few of them very quickly went, let's switch to takeaway.
Yeah.
And, you know, the thing is, if only one restaurant in town had switched to takeaway, it wouldn't have worked for them, because no one wouldn't have known. You wouldn't have created that culture and that change in behaviour in the consumer space of getting takeaway from like a really fancy restaurant, for example. Yeah, obviously Macca's, but you know, like a really high-end, like Nagisa started doing takeaway, like really great, like amazing takeaway, right? We started getting it, but if only one place had done it, the culture wouldn't have taken on. It needs every cafe in town to adopt that service delivery, so that people get used to it as an idea and as a behaviour change. And so it's in their best, whoever comes up with an idea first in this environment, it's in their best interests to tell everyone, hey, we should all do this and change, because we're talking about dramatic, you know, this period of time with COVID and what happens with how variable lockdown restrictions, and we've saw in Victoria with Wave 2 how quickly that can come back and clamp down, and how rapidly everyone in a category needs to mobilise to change mass behaviour overnight.
So it is a time potentially for like industries to collaborate, to come up with cooperative solutions to a problem that they're all experiencing.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing, you know, I think, you know, one of the things as a positive, you know, if you see someone who is doing something, that don't be afraid to reach out and contact them directly. I think there's a fear that, you know, if you see someone doing something, that if you say, oh, you know,
I'm going to copy that.
How did you guys go about that? That they'll say, rack off, that's my idea.
Yeah.
I think, you know, people from having gone through this shared experience are realising that we all want to create a culture in small business where we help each other. And I think, you know, and this is the whole Amazon thing.
Yes. So tell me more about that.
Before COVID, small businesses were under such increasing pressure from these conglomerates like Amazon, sort of eating their lunch, and Costco and all these big box stores and Bunnings. And you saw what Bunnings did to your, you know, local hardware store. Yeah. And I think, you know, businesses need to be a little bit more collaborative and collegiate, you know, in sharing their ideas and in helping other businesses in your category grow. Because if you know, one small business can't survive against Amazon, but all of them can, you know. And I think, you know, there is some really positive data, and you saw that in the Deloitte stuff. But there is a trend of people wanting to come back to thinking about spending more locally and being a little bit more conscious about where their money goes. And, you know, I think especially as you get outside of major cities and into places where we are, you know, in Newey and you know, Orange, everyone knows someone who works for or runs a small business. And so I think more than ever, you sort of are confronted with how difficult that is and how on the edge a lot of small businesses are. And so we want to help them out.
Okay, let's move to what I've called the Nike question. You know, Nike as a brand for athletes, and the question is around how do I, and this is a really intriguing one, then we'll get onto your tips. But for me then, on this question, how do I really know who my customer is? And you talk here about two separate ways of looking at your audience, and, you know, brand level being one, and then the second level, the marketing level. Tell me more about that.
I think, you know, that's a really a question that we get asked a lot, and we spend a lot of time thinking about as an agency, and who are we speaking to? Because when you look at a lot of advertising, when you look at a lot of bad advertising, they're not speaking to, they're speaking to their board generally. They're not speaking to their customer or trying to.
Yeah.
But within that, there's a bit of nuance. And, you know, I think we're finding lately talking a lot about there has to be there's horses for courses in how you look at your audience. And there's two really different ways. There's one, as you said, that I call like the brand level.
Yeah.
So if you're doing sort of more branding work, whether it's creating some, you're not just selling a specific product, you're telling the world who you are and what you're about and what your point of view is,
Yep.
you know, whether you're designing your website or, you know, doing a logo redesign, those sorts of activities.
Yep.
You have to look at your audience from the perspective of what do they have in common.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people like to, think that, my customers are all females 21 to 25.
Yeah.
That's rarely the case.
Yeah.
And, and I'm not talking about those sorts of commonalities. I'm thinking about things that they believe, things that they value, things that they find interesting, things that they speak to. I think, I've used Nike here as an example because they understand that very clearly in their brand. And they understand that everyone who wears anything, like I'm wearing one today, not that I look at the moment, but everyone who wears a Nike logo, they're doing that because they want to feel inspired. They want to feel athletic. I feel if this was I wouldn't feel
The same. Yeah.
Spring in your step, all that sort of jazz. And so Nike understand that. At the core of Nike's brand is the idea that their brand is people looking for some inspiration around athleticism.
Right.
And that's their brand idea. High-end fashion brands do it really well. If you look at a brand like Celine, or it's like the Celine woman is confident and sure of herself, and they design clothes for that. It's very succinct. Then there's the other level, which I call like the marketing level of understanding your customers, and that's very different. So rather than what they all have in common and what unites them and what they can all rally behind and and drive, a single-minded engagement with your brand. The marketing level is when you start thinking more about messages and what do we do on LinkedIn versus what we do on Twitter or what we do on TikTok. And that is getting more into what those people have, what makes those different groups different. And when I say different groups, again, it's not, ages. What do our female buyers versus our male buyers?
Well, I like the way you put it here. You say, this is never that what generation they are. Every Nike buyer wants to be athletic and inspired, but this means something different to a golfer, a skater, a runner, an Instagrammer, and so on, a sneaker nerd.
Yeah.
So it's taking it a bit further, isn't it?
Yeah. So, so Nike have a bunch of sub-brands. And so, athleticism in golf versus athleticism in like hardcore marathon running are really different. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to one singular brand.
Okay, so the other part here, before we go into your tips and the Bunnings question, is you say here that probably time for people to reassess who is my customer now, and who could be but isn't, and why. So marketing isn't just about this group of people I call my customers.
Yeah, I think because of how much data we can collect on customers through social media and loyalty programs and all of this, it's very common now to focus on who our current buyers are and let's just speak to those. But brands grow. Yeah. The best way brands grow is by bringing new and fresh buyers into the brand. And so I think periodically brands need to reassess themselves and look at themselves and say, yes, this is who we're speaking to now, but who aren't we and why and how do we communicate and bring other buyers? We did a recent rebrand a couple of years ago now on Newcastle Writers Festival. And you've met Rosemary. She's amazing and she's great. But she came to us with a really clear brief that she was, she understood who her current patrons were and the people currently coming to the festival, and she understood that wasn't representative of everyone who reads a book. And so how do we bring in a younger audience? How do we bring in more men to it? And a lot of that's through the amazing programming work that she did, but also in how we looked at the brand and changing how that presents itself. So that's, for me, never lose focus on the fact that your current buyers aren't the only people who could be buying from you.
Okay, another part or the next question before we get on to your 5 tips is this one. This is this whole notion of everything is, you and I spoke about this a little while ago.
Yeah.
Everything has changed, but nothing has changed. And you know, this whole situation, and this is where we spoke about Bunnings and Victor instead of Massport and so on, and, you know, supermarket screens, will it change what part of people buy? Or
Yeah,
so tell me more about this before we get on to your tips.
It's easy to get carried away. And again, I want to go back to sort of my opening salvo about talking about this particular point in time in the cycle of COVID in New South Wales. 4 months ago, different. If we go into a second lockdown, it's probably different. But what I think we've found is you know, there's a lot of talk about the new normal or what's normal or will we ever go back to normal and those sorts of things. And I think a lot of stuff has changed and will change, but people, by and large, are creatures of habit. And, you know, one global event isn't going to undo a couple of 100,000 years of evolution and things like that.
Yep.
An example it's a bit of a weird example, but I like to use, like, I don't know if you've seen The Walking Dead.
Yep, the zombies. Yep.
So Walking Dead, it's like up to 10 seasons now. And you think, like, 90 minutes of a zombie movie, I'm about at max capacity of zombies.
Yep.
How do you do 10 seasons of that? And what was really interesting is when you watch the first seasons, the zombies are terrifying and they are everywhere and they are popping out all over the place, and they're difficult to deal with, they're frightening, they have the upper hand.
Yep.
It's really interesting in the later seasons as the story moves on. The zombies just become a bit of an annoyance, and the way people deal with them, it's almost blasé. They're like, oh, here's some zombies, boop, knock them on the head, and they're gone. And I know that's a weird example, and it's fiction and all those sorts of things, but you really do see that in the way that people are resilient. You know, humans, we're amazingly resilient people, and we can adapt really quickly to at least accommodate changes. You know, and so I think COVID. Yeah, it's a horrible disease, and you know, I don't want to make light of the impact it's had on so many people and so many families. Yeah. But I just, you know, again, looking optimistically, I think we're all doing a really good job of coping with it and dealing with it. And you know, like I said, you know, we've put screens up in Woolies. Yeah. I don't know if they'll ever go away. Yeah. Has it changed the brand of butter that anyone's bought? No. And we all had to line up out the front of Bunnings. And like you said, lining up out the front of Bunnings changed how I got in and out of Bunnings, but it didn't change whether I wanted a Victor or a Massport.
I'm getting some signal on our timing. Yep. What we've got your 5 tips, and they're brilliant. We're going to. What I'd like to do though is suggest that we share those online and on the footer of the webcast that we've done. I guess I'm just going to use your summarising statement here, and then we'll do some thank yous. But you say, you know, COVID or bushfires or military coups may change how people physically get access to your product, but it really change how or why they choose one brand over another when they look to buy a car or get taxes done or go out for a meal. For some categories, maybe. For most people, probably not. So
and again, I don't want that to make me sound sort of callous that, COVID's no big deal. It's a huge deal, but from those decisions in how we choose the products and services, those motivations that have driven those choices for years are the same. We just have to go about it slightly differently.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for the preparation, the insights, the sort of secret knowledge that you've given us. We really appreciate it. And we certainly will, if anyone would like to contact you, we'll have them contact us and we can pass your details on. We'd like to once again acknowledge and recommend the New South Wales Government's Business Connect program. You can get up to 60 hours of one-on-one business support with one of the providers across the state. Independent providers who give you a really good insight to starting, growing or adapting your business. If you are interested in that, it's subsidised by New South Wales Government. You can call 1300 134 359 or email connect@treasury.nsw.gov.au, or you can simply Google Business Connect and that will quickly find your nearest provider. We'd want to thank again Fortronic, our amazing AV team here. The guys, great technology, great use of adaptive technology and getting information out through their webcast expertise. And they help us very much. If you'd like to get in touch with them, contact us. But that's everything for now. Gerad, thanks once again, and we'll share all of the tips that you've given us, which are really worthwhile.
Yeah, sure.
Anything you'd like to say to wrap up?
No, just, make some noise.
I love it. All right. Thanks, everyone. That's it for today. Cheers.